Welcome back to In Depth with Academia. I'm Richard Price, CEO of academia.edu, and it's great to have you with me today as we dive, in depth into one of the many fascinating developments happening in academic research. Whether you're a scientist, a health professional, or just curious about how our bodies handle that post-lunch energy dip, I think you'll find today's paper especially intriguing. So the paper we're talking about today is titled A Short-Term Food Intake Model Involving Glucose, Insulin and Ghrelin. It's a collaboration between Massimo Barnabei, Alessandro Bori, Andrea De Gaetano, Costanzo Manes, Pasquale Palumbo, and Jorge Guerra Pires. I'll be presenting their work neutrally. I'm not endorsing or critiquing it, just laying out the findings and what might be relevant for you, the listener. Let's start with the central question. This paper asks, how do glucose, insulin, and ghrelin interact in the short term after we eat a meal? And why is it even important to model this kind of thing? Well, understanding these relationships can help us make sense of what goes wrong in obesity or diabetes, and maybe give us clues about, say, whether we could design better treatments or even improve artificial pancreas technology in the future. Pretty cool, right? Now, a quick bit of background. Ghrelin, if you don't know that term, is sometimes called the hunger hormone. It pops up in the blood before meals to make us feel hungry, then subsides afterwards. Glucose, of course, is our main blood sugar, and insulin is the key hormone that helps move glucose out of the bloodstream and into our cells. Basically, the dynamic trio that manages when we get hungry, how much we eat, and how our bodies make use of that energy. So, what's the actual contribution here? These authors built a multi-compartment mathematical model. Think of it as a set of linked equations that describes how food moves through the gastrointestinal tract, how glucose gets processed, how insulin gets released, and how ghrelin levels all rise and fall during and after meals. They break down the gut into two main zones, let's just call them stomach and jejunum, to model how food travels and is absorbed. What does their model do that's special? Well, previous attempts to model food intake often ignored ghrelin or oversimplified its role. This team's model tries to capture how food's physical presence in the gut controls ghrelin production. In fact, ghrelin is suppressed when food reaches certain parts of the small intestine, not just any presence of glucose. That might sound like a small detail, but it could be critical for understanding hunger signals and meal timing. Now, about the methods. They used a bunch of differential equations. Don't worry, not going to quiz you on those. To capture the flow of food, glucose, and hormones over time. They tested the model using actual experimental data from healthy people who had their hormones measured throughout the day while eating 3 meals, similar to a fairly typical American diet. They then tweaked the parameters in their equations so that their simulated hormone curves matched the real data pretty closely. One thing to remember, these simulations give average values and, everyone's body is a little different, but it's still a useful step. Let's pause for a second. Have you ever skipped lunch and noticed you were absolutely famished by dinner? Like, not just kinda hungry, but ravenous? Well, their model can simulate this. When you remove lunch from the feeding schedule in the model, ghrelin levels peak much higher later in the day, matching that real-world hunger we feel. It's a small digression, but it's funny how often science lines up with our lived experience, although sometimes it definitely doesn't, right? Now, what did they actually find? Well, a few things stand out. First, the model's predictions, like how quickly food leaves the stomach, how blood glucose spikes after a meal and then returns to baseline because of insulin. Lined up well with published experimental data, they also showed mathematically that the model always gives physiologically meaningful, stable solutions. Basically, it doesn't blow up or give you negative blood sugar or impossible hormone levels. Always good in a model. And why should you care about all this? If you're dealing with issues like hunger, weight management, or diabetes, the insights from this kind of model could eventually feed into better treatments, maybe smarter meal planning, or even, let's say, artificial pancreas designs that more accurately mimic the body. Or if you're just curious about how hunger ebbs and flows during your day, this paper offers a new lens to think about it. Of course, it's not the final word. Science is always, evolving. Here's where I step in with another gentle reminder. I'm presenting these findings neutrally. Academic research is a search for insight, not an absolute truth. Models are only as good as the data and assumptions behind them, and human physiology is, well, really complicated. So, this paper by Jorge G. Perez and colleagues opens up further questions. How do other hormones fit in? Does this apply to people with metabolic disorders, or is it just a snapshot of healthy folks? Alright, that's where I'll wrap up for today. If you found this interesting, maybe share it with a friend, or even, your doctor. I don't know. Depends on your conversations. For more episodes, stay tuned to In Depth with Academia, where we keep exploring what research means for you, not as gospel, but as food for thought. Thanks for joining me. I'm Richard Price, and I'll see you next time.